Last time on the Skip and Josh podcast.
And then another friend of mine calls, and we're on the phone for the entire third period. So I didn't get to see any of the game. It was so annoying. Couldn't these people call me the day before or the day after when I had nothing to do? They had to call during the hockey game.
You literally have nothing to do for
2
18
months.
hours a day.
Yeah.
And with the 2 hours you want to watch hockey, that's when everyone decides to, let's check up on John.
Exactly.
You're listening to the Skip and Josh podcast with Skip Sherman and Josh Obadia.
Okay, Skip, so today we're going to count down our favorite Montreal Canadiens players of all time. But before we do that, and since we're going to be talking about hockey, I just want to chat a little bit about this current NHL season, which is really something that I've never experienced before. I don't know if you have. For starters, I mean, the season started in January, so that's already weird. But a couple of other things that are weird to me. Right now, the Montreal Canadiens lead the NHL in goals scored. I don't think that's happened since the days of Guy Lafleur. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, we're only 5 games in, right? So you don't want to make snap judgments, but they are scoring goals at like a really significant pace right now. It's kind of scary, actually.
Yes. The other thing is, it seems like there's a game every single night. It's like, and because they keep playing the same team over and over again, they all kind of blend into one.
Yeah. Well, look at how many times the Canadiens are playing Vancouver. Like, it's insane. They're playing 3 games in a row, and then I think they're playing them 4 out of 5 games, Vancouver.
By the way, that reminds me of a correction. Last episode, you mentioned that the Canadiens were playing the Canucks in Montreal tonight, but in fact, it's still in Vancouver. The Canadiens don't go to Montreal until next week.
I'm glad you mentioned that because Matthew said something to me. He's like, why did you tell me the first game was at home against Vancouver? And I looked it up. I'm like, oh, I just assumed. I just assumed that it was because how would they play 3 games in a row like over there? But yes, I'm glad you corrected me on that. I realized that this week only when, so it's funny because the schedule is interesting because I heard an interview clip this week of Brendan Gallagher. And he was a guest on a Vancouver radio station. They played it here in Montreal. And he was saying that the players there's many positives to the 3 games in a row against the same teams. And that he remembers a few years ago, Jonathan Toews brought it up on an NHLPA call that they had. That there was many players in favor of using this system even when this type of schedule, even when things are back to normal, because it takes the burden off of having to keep flying back to the West Coast. Like, why don't you just go to the West Coast once and play a bunch of games against all those teams, So as everything in the world with COVID-19, COVID-19 sucks and it's screwed up our whole lives, but there's going to be many positive changes in a lot of aspects of society and sports that are going to come out of the decisions that they had to make right now, right?
100%. I've been saying this for months. Not the part about the NHL schedule, but about other things. No. Yeah, there's already a bunch of good things that have come because of COVID-19. And you're right. If you're going to have to go to the West Coast, just go there once, get it all over with, and then come back.
We haven't done a pure sports episode in a while. I had a lot of notes about sports, but I mean, we can go on and on. Like, are you enjoying the hockey so far? It's quite good, I think.
I am, because there's been a lot of goals, so it's not a boring 1-0 or 2-1 game, and it's back and forth. Like one of the games against Vancouver, no team ever had a lead of more than 1 goal. They kept just matching each other, and it was just, there's always something going on. And I don't know if that's because they didn't have training camp and defensively the teams aren't properly oriented. I don't know what the reason is.
I find I have no idea what's going on in the rest of the league. I only know what's going on in the Canadian division.
That's 100% what I was going to say. I couldn't tell you anything about the rest of the league. I'm only following this one division, and I'm not going to even know until they get to the playoffs. I'm not going to follow any of the other teams.
Like, I looked at the standings today to see what's going on, and I was like, oh, Tampa's 3-0, and I saw a little bit of what's going on in some of the other games, but like, I have no clue what's going on in the other divisions. No clue at all. It's pretty wild, actually. It's kind of in our own little hockey bubble. So
I was just going to say, not only are the players like in their own bubble, I'm in my own bubble.
We are. It's really amazing. So just switching gears to more sports before we get into our Habs list. Are you going to watch football tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm going to watch football tomorrow. I haven't.
Yeah.
I think I've watched every playoff game so far in the NFL.
Yeah, good. Because I'm only mentioning it because you texted me right after, right after the Bucks won last week, and I know how mad you are. You don't want to see Brady do well. You didn't want to see Belichick do well, and you don't want to see Brady do well. You really have an in for these guys.
I mean, I can't be the only one. First of all, it's not just Brady.
No, you're not the only one.
It's also Gronkowski and it's also Antonio Brown. But I mean, part of the reason is I told you the day after they acquired Tom Brady, I told you they'll make the playoffs, they'll be a wild card team, and they'll lose in the first round. So they did make the playoffs. They were a wild card team. They won in the first round because they played Washington, who doesn't even deserve to make the playoffs. But they should have lost to New Orleans. New Orleans blew it. Everyone's saying how good Tampa Bay is. Tampa Bay beat a lousy New Orleans team. Drew Brees basically handed the game to them, literally, with 2 or 3 interceptions. So don't tell me that Tom Brady is the reason why Tampa Bay is where they are.
No, Tom Brady had a mediocre game, but you could argue that they didn't hand it to them. It was the Tampa Bay defense, because you saw the way they played defense. The defense that they played is exactly the defense that teams used against Peyton Manning when Peyton Manning was near the end of his career, which is basically like, we are going to guard everything within 10 yards. If you want to throw the ball more than 10 yards, you can take your chances, but we are not going to, they played so tight, and Breeze can't throw. He does not have a strong arm. So he was really like discombobulated. And it's interesting that it took till like 16 regular season games and then 2 playoff games for teams to sort of figure this out. Although Breeze was injured a lot during the season, so maybe, who knows. But anyways.
I think they would have been better off to use Winston or Hill, and they did use Winston for one play, and it worked.
Well, the only time that they could throw the ball deep was when they brought in Winston, because he can throw the ball that far.
Yeah.
Right? Anyways, we can go on, but we are going to talk today about our favorite Montreal Canadiens players of all time. But before we do that, I do have listener mail from last week, Josh.
Mailbag.
Big response, obviously, to our Bruce Springsteen episode, because our Twitter feed, the Skip and Josh Twitter account feed, is loaded with Springsteen stuff, right? Because a lot of people that I follow and that followed us back, and so on and so on. So we got a listener mail from our friend Jesse Jackson in Texas. Who,
I'm curious to know if whose list he liked better, mine or yours.
Well, he actually sent me direct message on an email directly saying, like, you guys should have had me as a guest.
We probably should have.
So his list, he sent me his list. If you want to hear his list,
I do.
You want to? Okay, so I'm gonna go 8 to 1, right?
Yeah.
8, starting with 8 and going up. Tucson Train, I'll See You in My Dreams, American Land, Girls in Their Summer Clothes, a song I really don't care for. No Surrender, Thunder Road, songs obviously we had on our list. Better Days, and his number 1 song, which I knew it was. If you've ever listened to any of his episodes, he talks about this song all the time, which is Land of Hope and Dreams, which was on my list. And I don't know if you watched that inauguration concert special thingy that they had this week. I'm sure you didn't. So Bruce Springsteen started the show actually singing that song, Land of Hope and Dreams, alone on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. And it was actually really, really good, because it's the first time we've ever heard that song sung solo acoustic. It's always this big, rambunctious song that includes the whole band. So that's Jesse's list.
I heard that Bruce was on the inauguration, but I didn't watch it.
He was one of the only people that actually sang live in Washington. The other people were all like pre-recorded wherever they live, which was really annoying and kind of way overproduced and not fun to watch, you know? So, all right. So, Josh, favorite Montreal Canadiens players of all time. How did you construct your list? How did your list come together? What kind of research did you do?
So I'll tell you right off the bat, I don't think we're going to have any of the same players, first of all.
I disagree.
You think we're going to have some of the same?
I think we are going to have at least one.
Okay. That's possible.
Looking at my list, I think there's one guy on my list that it's going to be.
So just so you know, I mean, my list, most of the guys, I didn't pick these guys because of their production on the ice, right?
Correct.
Most of them I picked, I might just like the guy for whatever reason. Something that he did off the ice, something that he said in an interview once, maybe because I like his nickname, who knows what. You know, a lot of it has nothing to do with what they did on the ice. And I mean, a lot of the guys I picked also, they didn't play their entire career in Montreal. They played on other teams, and they had other accomplishments with other teams as well. So I sort of factored that in too, even though maybe I shouldn't have.
How far back did you go in your list? Like, obviously on my list, I don't have Jean Believille, Rocky Richard. I don't have any of that. I don't even have Guy Lafleur on my list.
Right. I didn't go that far back, actually. I think I went to 1980.
That's where I started too.
Yeah.
Because we were 10 years old. I mean, yeah, the Canadiens won 4 Stanley Cups between 75 and 79, but I was a little kid. All I knew was that we were winning Stanley Cups every year. I didn't even know what it meant, right?
The other difficulty for me was there's a stretch of like 15, 20 years where I hated the Canadiens. And
when is that? In the 90s?
Like from 85 to like 2000-ish.
Uh-huh.
So I did pick some players from that era, but not many because I hated the Canadiens for those years.
Right. You have a trajectory among Canadians, well, Montreal people who actually start to like the team more when they move to Toronto or other places. Right?
Right. Like when I moved, that's it. I started to like them when I moved to this city, which was in 2003.
So I constructed my list very similarly. Like, it's players that I liked for whatever reason. And not necessarily the superstars, although these are all good players on my list. I didn't really have any scrubs. So do you want me to start with my honorable mentions?
Sure. I don't have any. I mean, I could easily have because I made a list of about 20, so I can mention some honorable mentions, but go ahead. You go first.
So my honorable mentions, it's not a big list, Josh. Mike McPhee, Bobby Smith, Carey Price, Shane Corson, Alex Kovalev, Chris Nyland, Mike Keane, Patrick Waugh, and then major recency bias, Nick Suzuki.
Okay. So my honorable mentions, Dale Weiss, Paul Byron, Joel Armia, Nick Suzuki, Bobby Smith, Guy Lafleur, Ken Dryden, Cristobal Huet, and Yaroslav Halak.
Very solid. Your list? Oh, no, my list, right?
Well, you go first. You pick this topic.
Number 7.
So we're going to start with my number 7, who is the most accomplished player in my list. He's a Hockey Hall of Fame member, and that is Larry Robinson.
Interesting.
So, yeah. Well, I mean, as a kid growing up, you heard about Larry Robinson as being one of the best defensemen in the league, and he was. You know, he played 17 seasons for the Habs. He won the Norris Trophy twice. He was the key component on a whole bunch of Stanley Cup winners. He won 6 Stanley Cups. But when I first started following hockey, Larry Robinson was an older player. And I really started to love him in that, you know, when the Canadiens made that Stanley Cup winning run in 86, and everyone talks about Patrick Waugh, but that team was loaded with a bunch of young players, and including Waugh, who was a goalie, but it had some unreal veterans like Bob Gainey, who was still hanging on, and Larry Robinson too. And Larry Robinson was still the anchor of this defense, even at an advanced age in 86. And, you know, I wrote in my notes, like, just what a leader, you know? So there you go.
Great. I mean, I have no, problem with picking Larry Robinson, but you mentioned that you didn't pick guys like Guy Lafleur and Ken Dryden, and they're roughly the same age. So I was just a little surprised that you picked Robinson.
Well, they are, but, Guy Lafleur wasn't on that team in 86, which was one of my first, like the first cup that I really remember well, right? So.
Okay, so number 7 for me, it's PK Subban. Obviously, he's not in the Canadiens anymore, but PK Subban, he won the Norris Trophy in 2013. He was an NHL All-Star 3 times. He played 6 full seasons in Montreal, 63 goals and 215 assists. Let's not forget, he had a few huge goals against Boston in the playoffs. He played for Team Canada. But more importantly than all of that, he donated $10 million to the Montreal Children's Hospital. And when you ask him a question in an interview, he actually gives you a real answer. Not like all these other players in the league.
Yeah, Subban's further up on my list, so I'll tell you why I like him when I get to him. But yeah, that's a good pick, Josh. I mean, obviously an incredibly popular player here in Montreal, also very polarizing. There's a lot of people that, just as many people that really disliked him that did like him, which is kind of weird, So.
Number 6.
All right, number 6 for me, Josh. You remember that Sheldon Surrey?
Of course.
Yeah, he played 6 seasons on the Habs. he had one humongous season where he scored 26 goals and 19 power play goals, which is actually an NHL record for defensemen, the 19 power play goals.
I didn't know that.
He just had this huge, he had this huge slap shot, which was a joy to watch. And it's kind of the last time the Canadiens had a really good power play is when he was there, because of that. And I'll never forget this game against the Leafs where they used him in the shootout. Do you remember this?
I think so. I think I know what you're going to say.
So they used him in the shootout, which was absurd. He comes in, he fakes the slap shot because all he could do is take slap shots. He fakes the slap shot and then just casually goes around the goalie because the goalie bit on the fake. And then when they asked him about, being used in the shootout, he said, well, that's the last time they should ever use me because now everyone's seen my only move. So he was just, yeah. I mean, and actually the reason why I put him in the list is because I met him once. We were picking up my in-laws at the airport here in Montreal. They were coming back from a trip from California, and Sheldon Surrey happened to be on their flight. So he came out before my in-laws did, and I recognized him, and he was walking with a guy from the airport, like a security guard or something. I don't know. It was kind of weird. And then we went right up to him and started talking to him, and Matthew was like, maybe like 5 years old, 6 years old. I don't remember how old, around that age, right? He could not have been a nicer guy. He crouched down on the ground, got eye level with Matthew, talked to him, just like it was really, really like a great moment, like it's great to see that an athlete could take the time, to talk to a young fan, for a couple minutes. It was fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 6 for me. So it's Thomas Tatar. And I know he's only been on the Canadiens. This is only his 3rd season with Montreal.
Thomas Tatar.
I love Thomas Tatar. First of all, he's already got 50 goals and 74 assists as a Montreal Canadien. He's a very skilled offensive player. He is a very skilled player, actually. He is a very skilled offensive player. He has great hands, and there's not many players on the team like him. In fact, I don't remember the last player like him that the Canadiens ever had. The fact that they were able to get him, the trade where they got him, I don't need to remind you, but I'll say it anyway. When they acquired him and Nick Suzuki and a 2nd-round draft pick for Max Pacioretty, that was a great trade for Montreal.
I mean, it's a steal, honestly.
It is a steal. But listen to this, a couple other things. He was drafted by Detroit, and he was having a very good career with Detroit. So Vegas acquired him at the trade deadline because they wanted to make a run for the Stanley Cup. And I understand why they wanted him, but I didn't realize how much Vegas gave up to get him. Vegas gave up a 1st-round pick in 2018, a 2nd-round pick in 2019, and a 3rd-round pick in 2021. That's a lot of picks for one guy.
And then he went on to being healthy scratch during that same playoff run that they acquired him.
Right. I don't know why they did that. I mean, the fact that they were willing to trade him to Montreal is great, but I still haven't even told you the 2 best things about this guy. First of all, I love his nickname. It's the Tuna. It's a great nickname.
Yeah.
But the best thing about him, Thomas and I share the same birthday.
Like actually the same year? No.
No.
He's not that
I'm 20 years older than him, of course.
Right. Okay, sure. Wonderful. Good pick, Josh. Love it.
Number 5.
So number 5 to me, we've already talked about him a little bit, and that's PK Subban. Like I said, he was probably the most exciting player we've had here in my lifetime. Also the most polarizing. Some loved him, some hated him. When they traded him, it was the Montreal talk radio media frenzy here. They hit the jackpot because half the city was for the trade, half the city wanted him out, half the city wanted to have a protest to keep him. It was crazy. He was a great player for us. No matter how you slice it, he was a great player for us. Like you mentioned, he scored so many clutch goals, especially in those playoff series against Boston. You remember that one where he came out of the penalty box and went on a breakaway and scored? I mean, that was probably one of the greatest moments in our playoff history in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
To be honest.
Zeller takes it. Penalty's over. Subban's back on. Subban scores!
I'm glad you mentioned that. You said he interviews you, he gives you an answer. They were going into game 6 or game 7 in one of those series against Boston, and the next game was going to be in Boston. And they asked him, like, how do you approach it, like playing on the road in such a hostile environment in Boston with the fans? And he said that the arena is going to be full of energy. The fans are going to be full of passion. And he goes, and they are going to like come in there expecting like a great game. They're going to cheer on their team. He goes, I can't wait to go in there and take that all away from them. Is exactly what he said. You know,
great answer.
That is such a great answer. You know, honestly, like wonderful. Anyways, look, I'm sad that we don't have him anymore. He was fun to watch, but that's hockey, right?
Yeah. Okay, so number 5 for me is Mats Naslund. Now, obviously, you know about Mats Naslund. He didn't have a very long NHL career, only 9 seasons. 8 of those seasons were in Montreal. He had 243 goals and 369 assists. He won a Stanley Cup in 1986. He was an All-Star in 1986. He won the Lady Byng Trophy in 1988. But one of my favorite things about him, he's smaller than me, and he had a legitimate NHL career. There's not many guys in the NHL his size that had good careers.
He was an incredibly exciting player to watch. Loved watching Mats Naslund play.
Also, you know, he was one of those players, you know, he always kept his nose clean. You didn't read about him in the newspaper, you know, breaking the law or doing any kind of illegal stuff. You never heard about it. So that's another reason I like him.
Very good pick, Josh. Very good pick.
Number 4.
All right. So number 4 on my list is Saku Koivu, who was the captain of the Canadiens for many, many years in kind of like the time that you said you weren't really following a fan of the team as much. Wasn't successful years. They had a few decent playoff runs in those times. He had 832 career points, you know, which is a great NHL career. He only hit 70 points a couple of times. So he never really lived up to his potential, which was supposed to be this really amazing offensive player. But most of that is due to injuries because he had a lot of injuries and illness also. You know, I don't know how much you remember going back to his rookie year. You know, he had 20 goals in his rookie season and then he had all this hype about him. And then he had 56 points in 50 games that next year. He was, I think, 3rd in the league in scoring. Mm-hmm. And then he got injured, blew out his knee. And he was never really quite the same after that because we never saw that explosive Saku Koivu. But I just loved him. He always conducted himself with class, despite the fact that the press here was often very unfair to him. Especially, I don't know if you remember the time where that he almost lost an eye, and then that idiot reporter from one of the newspapers, you know, snuck into his hospital room to take a picture. That's like classless. And then, you know, one of the greatest moments, sort of non-game related, but one of the greatest moments in the history of the 100+ years of the Montreal Canadiens is Saku Koivu's first game back, having come back from cancer, right? And I don't know how well you remember that, but like Saku Koivu coming on the ice, taking off his helmet, and then, you know, no hairless, completely bald Saku Koivu because of the different treatments where he shaved his head, like skating around the ice. I mean, that is an incredibly, incredibly powerful moment in the history of the franchise. So that's my number 4, Saku.
Well, it's interesting because my number 4 is also Saku Koivu.
See, I knew we would have many the same because we already have a few the same, right? So
you were right. So, according to my research, you know, he played 13 of his seasons with the Canadiens, and he was captain of the team for 9 of those seasons. And his Montreal stats: 191 goals, 450 assists. He won the Bill Masterton Trophy in 2001-02, which is qualities of perseverance and sportsmanship. He certainly exemplifies that.
Yeah, that's the year that he came back, right, from cancer.
Exactly. He won the King Clancy Trophy in 2006-07 for leadership and humanitarian contribution. Again, he exemplifies that. And as you said, he came back to play hockey after beating non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2001. There's not many professional athletes that can say that. So good for him, and certainly an inspiration to many people. But like you said, similar to Mats Naslund, what I said, he handled himself with class all the time. He never got into trouble, never did anything illegal, never broke the law. So just a classy player. And the fact that by the way, he was the captain of the team, and I don't think he spoke French, was a huge accomplishment because in Montreal, as you know, they like to have a captain who speaks French.
Number 3.
I'm at number 3.
Yes.
I don't know if this guy's in your list or not, Josh. We're getting down to the top 3. But my number 3 is Stéphane Richer, who played only 6 seasons with the Canadiens in the 80s, but, scored 50 goals twice. And he's the last Canadiens player to score 50 goals in a season. He had many good seasons after they traded him to the Devils. He was still a very, very good NHL player and super dynamic. But I mean, when I tell you that PK Subban was like one of the most exciting players we've had in the last how many years, like Stéphane Richer has to be number 1. I mean, this guy could skate like the wind and he had a slap shot that was feared. He was just the prototypical sniper. And I just remember like all those games in the 80s, like he was, if you were playing against him, he was scary to play against because he would pick you apart. This guy, when he was on his game, he was really scary coming down that wing. Once he started winding up for that slap shot, you were in trouble.
He might have been a better softball player than hockey player.
I heard that he's a tremendous softball and baseball player too. Yeah, what's pretty weird.
Yeah. Okay, so number 3 for me is Doug Gilmour, who, by the way, is in the Hall of Fame.
Oh my God, he only played in the Canadiens for 1 year.
2 seasons with the Canadiens. But as I said, a lot of the reasons I pick some of these guys have nothing to do with their production on the ice. So, First of all, he's the only guy on my list who's in the Hall of Fame. He played 2 seasons with the Canadiens, a total of 21 goals and 50 assists, so nothing spectacular. He won the Selke Trophy in 1992-93. He won a Stanley Cup with Calgary in 1989. He was a member of Team Canada in some Canada Cups. But one of the reasons I like this guy is that he was born in Kingston, Ontario, which is also the home of the Tragically Hip.
But the list is favorite Montreal Canadiens players, not favorite players born in Kingston.
I know, but I have my reasons, and I always liked Doug Gilmour because even when he was on Team Canada, he was like on the 4th line, and even though he had offensive skills, they asked him to be like a defensive player, and he did whatever they asked him to do. He could have played any style of hockey you wanted him to play, and he never complained, and he just did what he was asked to do, and just a great player. Similar to, I mentioned John Tonelli in our last episode or 2 episodes ago, similar to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I think Gilmour had more offense, especially when he went to Toronto and really became like one of the better offensive players in the league.
Actually, I think his best offensive seasons were with Calgary.
That's possible. The Calgary's worst trade ever was when they traded him. That was the dumbest thing they ever did.
Right.
Doug Gilmour's most famous moment as a Canadian. Do you remember what it was?
When he slammed the door and the glass broke?
Exactly. He slammed the door to the penalty box and the glass completely shattered. And he ended up getting an additional penalty for it. And it was totally not his fault.
Well, I mean, he did delay the game.
Well, I know, but he slammed the door. But I mean, he didn't think the glass was going to shatter,
No, you didn't.
Yeah, that's funny.
Number 2.
So number 2 on my list is a player that when I said that we're going to have one the same, I thought it was going to be this guy. And that is Kirk Muller.
Okay.
So we'll take your silence as maybe he's also on your list. I don't know. I was really shocked to jar my memory when I looked at his career stats to see that he only played 4 seasons on the Canadiens. Like, to me, Kirk Muller played more seasons on the Canadiens than he did with any other team, which is completely false.
That is false. You're right.
Yeah. So only 4 seasons. Obviously, his best season was 92-93, where he had 94 points. The Canadiens won the Cup that year. What I wrote in my notes is he was a model of consistency. He was a great 2-way player. I mean, he's the current associate coach of the team. He's still associated with the Canadiens. I think Kirk himself really associates himself as a Hab. I remember when they traded him to the Islanders, he was mad. He didn't want to go. There was rumors that he wasn't going to play for the Islanders. He was really upset to leave Montreal. And I don't know who coined the nickname. It's someone from the Gazette. It could have been Red Fisher, but I think it might have been another Canadiens reporter. His nickname was Kirk is Work. And that sums up everything you need to know about Kirk Muller. Brought his lunch. I'm going to use all the cliches. he gave 100% all the time. He brought his lunch pail to the rink every game. But I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's all true. You know, he was a great player for the Canadiens.
Okay, so it's interesting because we actually have 3 the same on our list, because number 2 for me is also Kirk Muller.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, not only do we have 3 the same, 2 of them were at the same spot. A lot of the things that you just said about Kirk, but some things you left out. So yes, 4 seasons with the Canadiens, a total of 104 goals and 143 assists. He won the Stanley Cup. He's currently an assistant coach with the team. So I don't know if you remember, but I actually was a big Kirk Muller fan when he was on New Jersey. In fact, I have a Kirk Muller jersey. So I was a fan of his before he got to the Canadiens.
Yeah.
And to top it all off, another player that was born in Kingston, Ontario.
Oh, I didn't even know he's from Kingston, Ontario. Wow.
He is.
That's wild.
He was on the last Canadian team to win a Stanley Cup.
That is correct.
Number 1.
So my number 1 was in your list, Josh.
Who's that?
My number 1 favorite Canadiens player ever is Mats Naslund.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I love this guy. I love Mats Naslund, and it's really for the reason you said. He was tiny. He was small, but he was so goddamn shifty on the ice. He didn't have this breakaway speed. Like, you wouldn't see him now and say, oh my God, he skates like Connor McDavid or Byron or any of like these guys that are like super fast. But he was fast. But the thing about Naslund is he had this crazy acceleration, and he had this way of, he was so shifty in tight spots. You know, he would be on the half boards, and then next thing you know, a couple of like little moves with his stick, he's in front of the net, and he's left you in the dust, right?
Yeah.
He was such a beauty to watch, this guy. You know, he's the last Canadian player, I think, to score 100 points in a season. He had 110 points in 85-86, and he had 80 points 3 other times. And you know, like, he had that game in the All-Star game where he had 5 assists in one game.
Right. Wasn't he playing on the same line with Mario Lemieux?
He was playing on the same line with Mario Lemieux, and they were absolutely unstoppable. It was so beautiful. I just love this guy, and he was my favorite player when I was a teen. You know, just love watching him play, and he played so well for the Canadiens for quite a few years. So that's my number 1. So we actually have 4 the same.
I'm surprised that we had that many the same.
Yeah, I knew that Kirk Muller was going to be on your list. That was a given, right? So
okay,
yeah. And I know who your number 1 is. You can announce it to everybody.
Yeah, so number 1, and everyone listening should know this, it's Rick Wamsley. He's my favorite player of all time in the entire league. And
tell the listeners who Rick Wamsley is.
I'll tell as much as I can tell. First, let me ramble off a few stats. Right. So he was actually the first winner of the William Jennings Trophy in his first full season in the NHL, 1981-82. He shared the trophy with Denis Herron.
That's the award that they gave for the team with the lowest, the goalies for the team that have the lowest goals against, right?
Correct, yes. And that was the first year it was awarded. And it was his it was his rookie season. He did play 5 games the season before that, but he was still considered a rookie in this season.
Right, okay.
He played 3 full seasons with the Canadiens, plus that season where he played 5 games. His Montreal Canadiens record was 72 wins, 36 losses, and 16 ties.
Wow, that's a good record.
It's not bad. And he also won a Stanley Cup with Calgary in 1989, but that has nothing to do with Montreal. Now, so everyone asks, why do I like this guy? So I like this guy because in his first season, they called him up just for 5 games as an emergency because I think all the other goalies were injured. And he only played 5 games, and one of those games was actually a shutout. And for some reason, they gave him jersey number 29, which used to be Ken Dryden's number. They hadn't retired it yet. In fact, I don't know if they've retired it now even.
I think they have.
So I was surprised that they would give him that number. Anyway, following that, when he came up to the team next year for, full time, he wore jersey number 1. So, but I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100% sure because it's a long time ago. I'm pretty sure that one of those 5 games that he played in his first season, I was actually at one of those games. Mm-hmm. And so this is where I first heard of him, and this is part of the reason why I liked him. I mean,
how mad were you when they traded him?
Oh, you didn't know me at the time.
No, I didn't.
Because I was watching the draft on television live when it happened.
Right.
I think it was the first time that the NHL draft was televised live. And when I heard the trade, I was bawling like a baby. I was so upset. You have no idea. Because I still have it now. It doesn't fit anymore. A Rick Walmsley jersey when he was on the Canadiens, not from other teams. I have a Rick Walmsley jersey from the St. Louis Blues as well. But I was devastated when he got traded. And that's the reason that I hated the Canadiens for all those years.
Oh my God. Amazing. They traded your favorite player and you never went back to them. But you didn't become a Flames fan.
No, I did actually.
Yeah.
Whatever team he played for, that's the team I was a fan of.
I just remember you telling me, you going on for like 10 minutes, giving me the argument about how the Flames should have used Walmsley instead of Mike Vernon, even when Vernon won them the Stanley Cup.
Well, here's the thing. So he was a backup in Calgary, but when he was on St. Louis, he was the number one goalie a few years.
Yeah.
And when he was on the Canadiens, I think he got a bad rap because remember, he played on the Canadiens in those years where they didn't have a lot of goal scoring. And so he had a decent goals against average for that era, but didn't win that many games because the Canadiens didn't score a lot. Like, who did they have? I think Bob Barry was their coach at the time. I'm not sure.
He played on the Canadiens in a very, very difficult time. And it was the early 80s. And the team still had this big reputation of the Montreal Canadiens that had just won 4 Stanley Cups in a row not that long ago, right? A few years prior.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden weren't a really good team. There was one year, remember, Mark Napier was the leading scorer, right?
Right.
So, yeah, you're right. They weren't a very good team.
And he still had 72 wins in, 3 seasons and a bit. So anyway, also, not to mention, I met Rick Walmsley a few times. He was always very nice to me every time I met him. I got his autograph, I think, once. There was one time, I just want to tell this one story. This is when, I met him when I was a kid, but I also met him when I was an adult. When I was working for the CFL, it was my first business trip, if you will. I had to fly to Winnipeg for work, and I'm at the airport waiting to get on my plane. Who's getting on the same flight as me? Rick Walmsley. He's flying to, I think, Brandon, Manitoba, because he was a scout at the time.
Right.
And so I just spoke to him for maybe a minute as we were boarding the plane. I didn't say anything to him about me meeting him previously because I'm sure he wouldn't remember. And the entire time I was debating going to sit next to him and talking his ear off for the entire flight. Now, I didn't end up doing that. Probably a good thing because he would have hated it.
Right.
But I was on the same flight as Rick Walmsley for a few hours.
That's crazy. I mean, there's not many people that Rick Walmsley will meet that will come up to him and say, "You're my favorite player of all time."
Exactly. And actually, I met Kirk Muller once, funny enough. Do you remember the McGill pub called Gertz?
Of course, yes.
I met Kirk Muller there once.
Wow.
And I also met Kirk Muller. Do you know the restaurant in Old Montreal, La Garde Manger?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I met him there once.
That's very cool. Very, very cool. All right. That's the list, Josh. That's a great list. I mean, obviously, I knew who your number one was going to be. I think my number one maybe was a surprise to you.
It was a
I'm
surprise.
glad we had some similarities. It's great to go remember some of those great players from our youth and from not so long ago.
Yeah, I have one current player. Did you have any current players on your list?
No. Although, honestly, Nick Suzuki should be in my list. I've never been so passionate about a Canadiens player as I am about Nick Suzuki. And it's gonna sound like I'm on the bandwagon because he's great now and everybody knows how good he is. But you remember, and we can go back and listen to old episodes. I told you at the beginning of last year that this player was going to be great before people really realized how good he was.
Yes, actually, I was going to mention. I do remember you telling me a long time ago, after the Canadiens acquired him, that you were raving about this guy for a while. So it
took the coach a long time last year to use him properly and put him at center because they were using him at wing and give him power play time. And I remember as soon as that switch flipped in the coaching staff's mind, you saw this player flourish. And I told you, this guy is going to be our leading scorer for every year for as long as he's on the team. And I still stand by that.
You did say that. And that was my only concern because the coach the Canadiens have currently, he's one of those old school guys. And so, as you said, it took a while for Julien to finally figure out how to use this guy. And so I was worried, you know, they re-signed Julien for another year. I'm like, oh, great, here we go again, you know, but maybe Julien's learned his lesson. I don't know.
He has, and I think the COVID situation forced that, because they had a lousy year last year. Lousy. But then when they came back and they were in that bubble and they were the last team allowed into the playoff bubble, they had no business being there. Julien just said, well, let's go with the young guys and see what happens. And then all of a sudden you had Suzuki, the number 1 center. You had Kotkaniemi, the number 2 center. And then all of a sudden you had a whole different team, right?
Yeah, and then Kirk Muller took over the team because Julien was in hospital, if I recall.
Yeah, that was a few games. Yeah, absolutely. All right, good list, Josh. Good list.
Yes, yours too.
The Skip and Josh podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. If you listen to the show through Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. To interact with the show, send an email to skipandjoshtshow@gmail.com. Follow the show on Twitter @skipandjosh, and go to facebook.com/skipandjosh to like the show page. To see links mentioned on today's episode, go to skipandjosh.com. And now for some final thoughts from the guys.
I do have some things that I wanted to end the show with, one specific thing. So, sad news, Josh, in the world of baseball. I mean, I'm sure you heard that Henry Aaron passed away.
Yes, it is very sad.
So I just wanted to give the listeners a little history lesson, because, you know, when most people think about Henry Aaron, they think about one thing. He broke Babe Ruth's record. But I just want to tell everybody that Henry Aaron was much, much more than that guy that you just see hitting that 715th home run. Obviously, he ended it with 755 home runs. But did you know, Josh, that Henry Aaron has the 3rd most hits all time in Major League Baseball, 3,771. Only Pete Rose and Ty Cobb have more hits than this guy.
I didn't know that.
And that he made the All-Star team every year for 20 years, from 1955 to 1975.
That's insane.
Henry Aaron was in the All-Star game, which is obscene. And also, everybody knows, like, you know, the home run list and who has 700 homers and who has this, whatever. But he's also the number 1 player all time in RBIs. He has more RBIs than any player in the history of Major League Baseball. So, I mean, and I don't know how much you remember, but there's a really great exhibit of Henry Aaron at the Baseball Hall of Fame. When the last time we went, it was there, showing all the racist hate mail he got on the way to breaking Babe Ruth's record. They have the letters there. You can even read them, and they're disgusting. And it's a testament to the man that he kind of carried on and, you know, broke that record despite people telling him that, like, they were going to kill him if he broke the record, you know, in letters. So pretty amazing. Baseball he was one of the greatest players ever, and a big loss for Major League Baseball.
Things that bug me?
Okay, so this is really old, and I've wanted to mention it many times on our show, but I keep forgetting to talk about it. So it's from March 11th, 2020, and you know what happened on March 11th, 2020, obviously.
Yeah, that's when Rudy Gobert tested positive and everything shut down.
Exactly. So
yeah,
think back to that game, and I'm sure you've seen this clip many times, where the public address announcer is announcing that the game has been canceled and that everyone has to leave the arena.
Right.
So I don't remember his exact words, but basically he says something like, the game has been canceled, everyone has to leave. Don't worry, you're all safe. When he said that, that was so annoying to me, because the first thing I'm thinking, if I'm there, if you're telling me, don't worry, I'm safe, I'm worried. Like, he should never have said that. He should have just said, unfortunately, the game has been canceled. Everyone has to leave the arena. You'll be notified about refunds for your tickets, yada, yada, yada. He should not have said, don't worry, you're all safe. And the way he said it too, like, if you go back and listen to it, he deserves a punch in the head.
It's funny. It's funny to go back and look at that now. You're right, because there's definitely other ways to convey what happened, right? Or the reason why. I mean, obviously people want to know the reason why, and by saying, don't worry, you're all safe, it's not telling them the reason why, right?
Right. And then, I mean, obviously they didn't want to say the reason why, and that's fine. I get it. But like, when I'm thinking, don't worry, you're all safe, I'm thinking, is there a bomb in the building? Do I have to get out of here quickly?
But the reality of sporting events in 2020, in this day and age, is the internet will tell you everything, because all those people in that arena can go on Twitter and find out exactly what's going on almost in real time. So.
Right. But anyway, I just didn't like the way he handled that at all.
Wow. Pretty crazy. Looking back to March 11th. All right. Good one, Josh. Good one. As always, your observations are astute and also kind of out of the box. Things out of the box is the wrong word. It's like you think about things that regular people don't consider, honestly.
This is true. This is absolutely true.
Yeah. So on that note, what are we going to do next week? What's the list? What's our topic for next week? I'm putting all the pressure on you because last time I asked you this, you told me I have 10 things on my list and I don't like any of them. So now I don't know what's on the list.
Okay. So since it's 2021, my topic for next episode is your favorite smartphone apps.
Oh, that's great. That is great, Josh.
I don't know if I have 7 that I like even, but...
Well, I mean, I have like 100 apps.
Right, but I mean, that you actually like.
My phone is really... Yeah, we'll get into this next week. My phone is really streamlined, and I bet you yours is more. Like, I don't have any extraneous apps. Like,
Neither do I.
I just have what I use.
Neither do I, because when you add more apps, even if you don't use them, it drains your phone.
Yeah. So that's a good one. I can't wait to talk about that because that's really great. And in keeping with your theme of recent topics, it'll be really easy for you to do your research, Josh, because you could just look at your phone.
That's true. I don't even have to get off my couch.
I love it. Oh my God, it's so good.
Listen, when someone comes to us and offers us that $100 million contract that other dude got for doing his podcast, I forget his name.
Joe Rogan.
Yeah. When someone comes and offers us that kind of money, I'll do as much research as you want.
Got it. But when we're just doing this on a Saturday morning as a hobby, well, let's just keep it real, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So next week, smartphone apps. Talk to you next week.
Okay. Have a good week.